Hello and welcome into the Mind Your Business podcast, a presentation of the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce. And special hello to all of you watching us on YouTube. New feature for the program now, so you can see how these things come together. I promise you it's not that interesting, but you can see it now for yourself. So we wanted to start off the new look to this podcast and new sound to it with a familiar face and certainly somebody that has been very supportive of this project since we started it at the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce several years ago. James Milner is the president and owner of Appalachian Commercial Real Estate, and he is the first to join us inside his newly branded Appalachian Commercial Real Estate double box here on Mind Your Business. So, James, always great to talk to you. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, David. Great to be here. I feel the love today.
I know you do. Well, one of the things that we enjoy about this program is that we're able to take members of the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce community and be able to use their expertise to help guide community conversation, alert people to trends that may be helpful to their business, or just keep them simply informed about what's going on. And we have used James a number of times in that context, whether it's on this program. You'll note that James Milner is a regular contributor to our economic indicators report, which will be coming back out for the quarter in a couple of weeks. But as we do this, it's great to take the inventory of the commercial real estate world and really get an appreciation for what that landscape looks like on a regular basis. There are oftentimes national storylines that get talked about that may not necessarily play out the same way here. There are also times that things do impact communities, especially in rural North Carolina, very similarly. So to have somebody that's an expert in commercial real estate, not only here, but is also plugged into the national scene, offers us an opportunity today to get some unique perspective. So by saying all of that, James, I welcome your expertise to this and really just kind of want to start out with a general look at the radar. What have you seen developing in the commercial real estate space here in the community over the last 6-8 months or so?
Yeah, the last time I spoke to members was, obviously back at the beginning of the year. One of the things that I mentioned during that speech was, look, be prepared that transactional activity is going to be down from last year. So we saw that in the first quarter report that we did with you guys. And we're just seeing that continue, that it hasn't come to a grinding halt by any means, but certainly the activity is down. There are fewer and fewer opportunities on the buy and sell side. I think that sellers obviously are dealing with a couple of issues. One is, they have some capital gains or tax issues that they're dealing with. And they also, the supply of real estate can't find anything to take those monies and replace it with or reinvest. And so that's really, and then the obvious is obviously interest rates. With the rise of interest rates, it's becoming more and more difficult to borrow money, which is often needed. We call leverage. It's hard to borrow money in order to purchase real estate. So, or even refinance, real estate. So, it has been a little slower than usual, but doesn't mean that we're not busy in other areas. And so as we look at the landscape of Boone, we're seeing the activity in kind of two main areas, right? If you look at our downtown or CBD, a lot of you will know a fervor of leasing activity, not so much sales, but leasing activity that's been happening downtown. We can see that with the phys ed that's going into the old Army surplus store. We can see that with the rebrand of Our Daily Bread into now Famous Toastery. We can see that with, towards the end of last year, or a little bit before that, we saw companies like Venture come into downtown. So these are all leasing transactions where the tenants don't necessarily own the real estate, but they're making an investment, right? I think Howard Street as a whole, we hope that the town will, continue with their revitalization and move forward with that project. It's certainly going to be a benefit to downtown, but you're also seeing the redevelopment of sites, right? So we saw the old Cafe Portofino come down. It's going to be replaced with a new hotel. We saw the old Marketplace building come down, going to be another John Winkler project with hotel, retail, and apartments in that project. So, and then, obviously in the downtown, we have Rivers Walk that we work on, and seeing some good leasing activity. Recently, just last week, we had Acrisure, which is a insurance wholesaler, open up in that beautiful bell tower space. So they are open. I'm sure they're going to be calling you soon, David, for a ribbon cutting. And we have some other, new tenants coming into that space. So I think we're getting over this hump of a lot of community members talked about how, these mixed use buildings weren't going to integrate within the community, but really the reality is they are integrating and they are getting leased and we are seeing activity. It has taken some time, and I think, we're finally getting over that COVID hump as we, the other area that obviously we're seeing a lot of activity in is Blowing Rock Road. And it's no surprise that, on Blowing Rock Road is our core commercial corridor. This is where, most of our national retailers are located. So we saw buildings like Take Five towards the end of last year. And then, obviously the new 5-star car wash. And the problem is all these national retailers want to be on Blowing Rock Road, but there's no supply. They're not creating any more space on Blowing Rock Road, which is kind of driving the growth out to the east side of town. So we're hopefully going to see more and more actual development happen. And I think as the town makes decisions on the Bullock Farm, the county, does their work on the new EMS building there at University Nissan, it will naturally fill in between my office, Jefferson Road 194, and, Bamboo Road.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes helpful to provide a little bit of context, and with that comes reassurance, right? So you mentioned a number of projects that have seen uses of buildings, longtime businesses. I think you brought it up first was our Daily Bread. That was a business that was sold by the longtime owners, and they now see a new restaurant moving into that space. But I guess what I'm getting at there is that in communities across the country, not just Boone and not just in North Carolina, there is often that activity of what you see a reinvention of space. Maybe it's a longtime business chooses to sell and get out of the business altogether, but somebody new comes in, or you see a building fall on one piece of property like Precision Printing was on Blowing Rock Road for forever. And now Seven Brew will be opening a coffee location here in the not too distant future. So I guess, trying to make sure that people understand that activity in a community is normal, wouldn't you say? Right. I mean, I know you're dialed into this commercial real estate community on a national scale. Do other communities see the same kind of churn, if you will, on an annual basis of short-term and long-term things moving on and moving away, like the sagebrushes of the world, only to be replaced by new opportunities for investment, like you were mentioning earlier?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the general public maybe, and even, members of the chamber don't understand is that, in the world of appraisal, we have this thing called economic life, right? That a building can be put on a piece of property and it has useful and economic life. It has contributory value, but over time, the underlying land value is going to exceed the value as improved. So we have seen that. Obviously, a great example is the one that you mentioned, the Seven Brew site, right? Sold for over $1 million. And, that building had been there for at least 4 or 5 plus decades, right? And just was, I don't want to use the word disarray, but it wasn't worth the underlying land value was worth more than the building as it exists improved. So we see this. It is a normal and natural cycle that over time, a property owner has one of two choices, the same as you have with your house, right? You can put money into that building and keep mechanical, HVAC, plumbing, kitchens, all up to date, right? Or you can not put that money into the property and let it, continue to operate. But ultimately, because land is such a scarcity in our community, these land values have been doing nothing but going up. Another good example of that is up here on East King Street, right, where the sports, the Pro-Am sports used to be, right? Those two buildings have reached the end of their economic life. More than likely, those two buildings will come down. We'll see something new get redeveloped. Certainly the Portofino site had reached the end of its economic life. And so over time, I think that sites should be redeveloped, and that we should make that investment of new construction into our community.
As we discuss other trends that we see around the country and wonder how maybe they impact us here in the high country of Northwest North Carolina, you turn on a national news outlet and you hear a lot about commercial real estate, really more so about who's not in it versus who is occupying that space. And certainly still a lot of conversation on a major national scale with major employers about how they're bringing workforce back into those high-rise buildings in cities like Charlotte and Atlanta and Chicago and on beyond that. We often talk about it's important to understand national issues, but it's also even more important to keep local context in mind. So with that said, where do you see the commercial occupancy? Are there opportunities for occupancy out there? Are you seeing people, kind of using the space that's available in ways that maybe traditionally they have in the community, given the fact that we've been through all this economic uncertainty over the last few years? Are you seeing behavior pretty much the same as maybe before COVID began?
Yeah, I would respond to that a couple of different ways. We all know that Boone is a very special place, but Boone is not San Francisco and Boone is not Chicago, right? We don't have, part of that has to do with our employer bases, right? We certainly have some strong employers, but we are not also using huge office buildings that, may be getting repurposed. If anything, we are at a shortage of office space, just as in many other segments. At the beginning of the year, I talked about how we are at a shortage of industrial space. If we could duplicate our industrial park twice over, we'd be able to get more industry into our community. But so we are limited. We aren't facing the same issues that are happening at a national stage because we have we continue to have a supply and demand problem, right? We've talked about this a number of times in our economic indicators report that there continues to be demand for commercial space, right? So if you're a business owner or a tenant, you need space. That every day, that is the phone call that we get here at the office. We need space, and most oftentimes there's nothing out there. It is very continues to be very, very tight. Even a local landlord purchased an office condo, and instead of finding one user, took and spread it out over 6 different users because there's so much demand in what we call E-suite or key man space right now that our community is very entrepreneurial based, right? A lot of sole proprietors. So these 1-man or 2-man shops need a space. And so they often get funneled into what we call E-suites or key man spaces. And now all of those are full all over Boone. We have, obviously we represent landlords and we have some space available, but we a lot of what we talk about is also pricing, right? That battle of supply and demand and what happens to rent, right? Um, I, I think that we, as a community, if we could find a way to add more supply in the commercial space, we'd be much better off to meet the need that we have. But until supply meets demand, there's equilibrium. Rents are going to continue to rise, occupancy is going to stay high, and it just creates more difficulty for the business owners trying to find space to operate from.
So that kind of leads us into the last big topic of conversation here in our chat today, and that centers around just really economic development in general. People that are desiring commercial space, whether that's to buy it and develop or lease a space that already exists, are often bringing staff with them. That means that they need housing, and they would like to have that as close by as possible. And that is certainly a whole different conversation that we've been having here in the community lately about the availability of housing stock, the ability to get your hands on not only affordable but safe housing and different types. So as that conversation brews, I see all of this is interrelated, and I know you do too. We talk about this all the time. You work with a number of companies that look to develop properties in the housing arena. What are you hearing from them as to opportunity that exists, or what are they looking for to make a lucrative project here? And do those lucrative projects match up with the need at certain levels for housing availability in a community like ours, or really anywhere in rural North Carolina for that matter?
Yeah, I'll be the first one to say publicly that, and I've told you this, David, before, that, I acknowledge that our community is in a housing crisis. We really are. We need to, but in the midst of that housing crisis is a very simple answer, and the understanding of supply and demand, right? In terms of housing, we have so much demand and yet so much little supply. That is how, in itself, these apartment rents have skyrocketed and gotten out of hand. Right? That Appalachian State University can only house so many people on campus, and then outside of that, both student and staff population, they have to go out to the private sector. And that private sector is trying its best to meet its need, but that private sector, or the developers, are struggling just to find the land, right? And then they have to deal often with municipalities, right, and the ordinances and the system development fees. So there are certain barriers to entry for the developers to provide what is needed. I wish every day, David, that I could wave my magic wand and create, these beautiful tract subdivisions that we see in larger markets. The problem is we just don't have available land to do that, and part of that is we're going to have to look outside of this natural town of Boone boundary to find land that is suitable for development. And in order for that development to happen, we need to have this conversation about infrastructure and system development fees and water, sewer, and other utilities, and issues like Apple Cart, right? I mean, these are all interconnected, but I think that we have the opportunity to be a very economic, viable community outside of our existing major employers, but we have to find a way to house the non-student, whether that's more what we call market rate product. One of our first market rate projects is coming to market in August of this year. The Collection, which is a project by a local developer on the east side of town is a project that is designed for our firefighters, our nurses, our policemen, working folks, and is not going to be at this, call it student housing rate. It is, if we could take that one project, we could multiply it by 10 and still not fill the needs that these employers are having to house their people in and around Boone. In terms of non-residential development, it still goes back to available land and the ordinance and the fees and the cost of development. And that's one thing that I don't think community members really understand, is that a developer has chosen that profession, just like we have doctors and lawyers and police officers and nurses. Developers, want to do a project and make money, and they're not the evil entity that so many people make them out to be. They want to help provide something that the community needs, right? And I think that if we could see more communication between our municipalities and our development community, which some of that is finally happening, right? Our new comprehensive plan process has probably been one of the most inviting lines of communication between those two, the private sector and the public sector, that we've had in the last 10 plus years, and getting their input and knowing what their struggles are, and then hopefully finding some remedies to fix those problems. So there are good times ahead, but we have to all work together for the greater good, and understand that things in Boone over time are going to change, but ultimately starts with finding available land in order to develop.
Well, and I think as you bring up these points, I think it's also something to say too, that an underlying piece of this that I think in many ways, and somewhat different approaches, I think there is some consensus in this community that as things are added to the landscape here, there is still very much a desire to keep the character of a small mountain community, and so part of the underlying theme of comprehensive plans or what have you are to maintain the integrity of what it is that attracts people to come here in the first place. But that does add a layer of complexity too. That doesn't make it just as simple as throw down a subdivision just like they do in Gastonia or Cornelius or Guilford County, or pick your place, because of some of those things that you'd like to maintain about a special place, as you've mentioned. So that makes participation in a comprehensive plan process that much more important for all stakeholders that are involved. And I would urge all of you to keep your ear to the ground. Certainly the Chamber will do our best to communicate timelines as the town of Boone continues through that process. They've gone through some stakeholder interviews already. That will expand further as we move into the back half of 2023 and into 2024, even as the town begins to set some of the things that James has talked about in terms of policy, ordinances, updates to the Unified Development Ordinance, and other changes that will ultimately go into shaping Boone and how it looks and feels and behaves with the rest of the county around it in the decades to come. Last thing I want to close with here real quick, James, and you've helped us kind of see down the road on this a little bit, and I know that there are a number of other folks that can chime in on a similar track on very many different platforms for sure. But you were mentioning some about development cost earlier. As you talk to developers, are you starting to see the cost per square foot of commercial development starting to come back down with some of the supply chain issues that drove that up, and certainly interest rates being what we've seen in the last year has not helped that at all? Are you starting to see some of that cost coming down, or is it still maintaining a plateau of being awfully expensive to build commercially in a market like ours?
Yeah, when you said you wanted to get together today, I ran a quick number on the latest build out project that I have data on, and it continues to be strong. I think that if we talk to some of our general contractors, they're still finding pain points with their subs, and certainly with certain materials. I've heard horror stories about something as simple as electrical boxes, not being able to get one for 6+ months, and because of supply chain issues. So those are still at the forefront, and cost is certainly still high, and don't see it coming down anytime soon.
It's amazing in this inflationary world that we live in, how some of those pressures come and go and the randomness to them all. I remember about a year ago at this time talking to some restaurateurs here in the community, and it was all about frying oil and an immediate spike that was seen in that was just unforeseen, and it went down almost as quickly as it came up, and it's been all over the place since then. But yes, availability and pricing certainly something that we will see, and hopefully we'll see some stabilization there soon. James, we often give you the opportunity to tell people how to get in touch with you, and I say that all the time on this show. So I wondered if you might want to take a spin at it and just let people know if they have questions about the sale or leasing of commercial space, or just want to talk to somebody about what their eventual needs may be. How can they best interface with you and your team?
Yeah. Thanks again, David. Appalachian Commercial Real Estate, as you hear every week, provides sales, leasing, consulting, and appraisal services for owners and occupants of commercial real estate here in the High Country. And if you are dealing with a space issue, working on a project, there's no fee, or for my time to just talk. Would love to help you if we can. The easiest way to get a hold of me is my contact information is on my website at www.appalachiancre.com, or you can email me at james@appalachiancre.com.
Excellent. Well, you spent a few more words than I normally do on that, but overall the message was the same. So, well, James, we appreciate your continued support of this podcast, and appreciate all of the information. Look forward to seeing your economic indicators report here in a couple of weeks, and thanks for taking the time with us today.
Not a problem.